first I want to thank Northwest Village Network for inviting me to give this talk on Beatrix Potter's art. And I also want to thank the Beatrix Potter Society for originally asking me to give this paper at the 2016 International Study Conference. And the Warren Archive for giving me open access to their image database. And also thanks to Ruth Seeley, who talked to me about watercolor techniques when I was doing my research for this talk. Secondly, I want to explain how I came to know so much about Beatrix Potter. In 1988, I took a reference librarian job in the Free Library's Rare Book Department, and it seemed like a good fit because they have so many visual collections. They have illuminated Western and Eastern manuscripts and several collections of illustrators like Beatrix Potter, Arthur Rackham, Kate Greenaway, the students of Howard Pyle, and Robert Lawson. And the Free Library has the largest collection of Beatrix Potter's work outside of Great Britain. There are over 150 drawings, sketches, watercolors, all her little books in original, in first editions, and quite a number of, presentation copies, some manuscripts, original manuscripts, and some letters. And soon after arriving, I took on the task of organizing the Potter original art. They were sort of organized by size in boxes, and they sort of had numbers, but I made those numbers their call number and made catalog cards for them. And gradually I became the go-to person for Potter, even though, I had to learn all about her. And so I've given talks on her and on the Free Library collection about 6 times to the Beatrix Potter Society, which is a British sort of scholarly society, and also numerous other places like Longwood Gardens and even Philobiblon, which is the rare book collectors and librarians in Philadelphia. All right, so now I'm going to share my screen. So that I'll get out of the way. And I'm going to make this little. Okay. So here we go. So this, so Beatrix Potter's popularity has endured because her work, like all great artwork, conveys universal themes: cozy homes, joy, family, friendship, mischief, conflict, and rescue. And in this presentation, we'll see lots of her drawings and watercolors and hear about how her work has influenced 3 modern children's book author illustrators. I couldn't talk about all her different artwork in 45 minutes, so I'm going to focus on her sketches and her landscape watercolors because they show something about how she worked as an artist and illustrator, and they set the scene for the stories. And they're beautiful, well-done watercolors. From what is recorded in the Warren Image Archive, some of the watercolors we're going to see have not been published or were published in only 1 or 2 books about her long ago. So her family was artistic. When her mother was growing up in the 1840s and 50s, it was usual for a young woman of her class to be schooled in various arts, such as drawing, painting, or embroidery. A couple of Helen Potter's watercolor paintings have survived, and this is one of them. And it's not bad. In the photo on the left, Beatrix is 8 or 9, And Beatrix's first drawings were done at this age. We have some surviving sketchbook pages of Beatrix's father, Rupert. These were drawn when he was 21, 1853, and in his apprenticeship in law in Lincoln's Inn in London. And they're full of imagination and fantasy. There's sketches of birds and ducks and sheep and people, but also a dog at a spinning wheel and another playing the flute. This shows playfulness not apparent in the many somber portraits of him and his family. Here's another one from that sketchbook. I guess some are caricatures of maybe his classmates or his teachers. He became very interested in photography in the 1860s and became a skilled amateur photographer. He made numerous portraits of his family and friends and made landscape views of use to painters. This photograph he made of Esthwaite water, and it's not dated, but it's pretty beautiful. He was very interested in art and frequently attended exhibitions at the London museums and galleries and often took Beatrix along with him. Beatrix's brother Bertram was 6 years younger than she. He also became a painter, working in oil. There are several of his paintings in Beatrix's study at Hilltop, her home up in the Lake District, and several of his wonderful etchings in the hallway just outside. This oil painting of Esthwaite water from 1902 looks very similar to Rupert's photograph in the previous slide. Let's go back and look. So we don't really know. Well, they're certainly from the same point of view, and we don't know whether Rupert shot this for Bertram or if they were out working at the same time or what. In the journal Beatrix kept from 1881 to 1897, she chronicled her daily activities. And she also talked about many of the art exhibitions she attended with her governess or her father. Rupert had become good friends with the painter Sir John Everett Millais. That's him on the left there. Millais was one of the founding members of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood in 1848. And the Pre-Raphaelites rebelled against what they saw as mechanization of art and sought a return to the abundant detail, intense colors, and complex compositions of 14th century Italian art. His most well-known painting from that period is Ophelia, painted in 1851-52. The Brotherhood as a group was short-lived, but their influence was far-reaching, such as the arts and crafts movement of the later 19th century and William Morris. When Beatrix Potter met Millais in the 1880s, his work had grown in a different direction. He was doing portraiture and genre scenes and had become a wealthy man. She loved this painting, you feel, of Ophelia. She says in her journal on March 7th, 1886, about a retrospective of Millais' work, the public seems to have confirmed the Huguenot as first favorite, but to me it seems eclipsed by its neighbor Ophelia, the most exquisite work in the collection, and probably one of the most marvelous pictures in the world. Not that I think the Huguenot is overpraised by a syllable. What is said of its expression, pathos, and painting is quite true, but the satin in Ophelia is equal to the velvet in the other. The face is even more touching, and the subject gives room for more detail. I couldn't find a photo of the Huguenot. Another of the famous pre-Raphaelites is Sir Edward Burne-Jones. Beatrix saw a number of his paintings on exhibition and didn't like them very much. She said in her diary, she says about one of his paintings, Burne-Jones, great pictures of the King and the Beggar Maid, painted 1884, which has been praised to the skies, has a great deal of work in it and would be very interesting if it had not been painted 400 years since. Oh, if it had been painted 400 years since, 400 years ago. The figures are not over well drawn, the faces have no expression, and the beggar maid is of the usual ugly type. She later referred to her youthful criticisms as naive, but what interests me most about this one is her pointing out that the figures had no expression. In her later work, she conveyed expression so well in her characters that I think her statement here shows how much she valued expression in art, even at 18. Oh, and just as an aside, when I returned to London after giving this talk up in the Lake District in 2016, I was pleasantly surprised to find all of these paintings and some others that I had found, referenced but didn't include in here, all hanging in display in one room at Tate Britain. So that was pretty cool. Now on to Beatrix's work. First, I'm going to show you a pencil. Well, no, I'm not. No, let's see, wait a minute. First, yes, I'm sorry. The first I'm going to show you is a pencil and watercolor drawing she did at the age of 8 at Dalgwas, which is in Scotland, where her family spent summers for many years, of the gardens and the fields. Well, at first glance, it looks a bit like a bunch of blobs. There's more there. See the line of trees in the background, and going up the line of trees in the background that helps show the rise in the hill. The composition and using different colors for the different trees in the foreground helps draw our eyes through the composition and give it depth. The colors are drab, but that was typical of the Victorian color palette of that time, and was probably what she was both used to seeing and the paint available to her. This next slide, which unfortunately I only have a black and white copy of, what was a color sketch. It's signed HBP March 1876 in the lower right corner. She was 9 and taking this very seriously. The composition's well developed with wagon and animals crossing in the midground, crossing the bridge in the midground, and the mountains in the background. And kind of what excites me about this picture is the movement conveyed, the sort of the slow procession across the bridge, and then the birds soaring above. This watercolor, made when Beatrix was 12, shows much development in her skills. She's capable of creating a mysterious smoky atmosphere. It's called Three Witches of Burnham, referring, of course, to the scene in Macbeth. Her grandfather, Edmund Potter, served as president of the Manchester School of Art for 3 years, and because of his very successful calico printing firm, was elected a fellow of the Royal Society. And I suspect that when the family saw her early drawings, they were knowledgeable enough about art to see her talent and encourage her. Now this is one of her first rabbit watercolors, done in 1880 at the age of 14. Here we can see she has developed considerable skill with detail, drawing many fine lines to depict the fur. She made many, many sketches of animals in sketchbooks. This undated sketchbook page, which is from the Free Libraries collection, shows rabbits and cats in pencil with one rabbit drawn in watercolor. And here's another example of two bunny sketches done in sepia ink and pencil, also undated. We think of her as a self-taught artist, and she certainly had innate talent, as we can see from her early drawings. But in addition to the encouragement of her family, she did take a course of drawing classes when she was 15. Those classes were in the Science and Art Department of the Committee of Council on Education. And she received an art student certificate of second grade in freehand drawing, practical geometry, linear perspective, and model drawing. She was educated at home by a tutor. She didn't, other than this, she didn't go to school. When I visited the Beatrix Potter Gallery in Hawkshead, the day before I gave this talk in 2016, I saw that certificate on display, and I hadn't been aware of it before I did that research. She also took painting lessons at 17 with a painter she called in her journal Mrs. A. These seemed to be for working in oils. She didn't like her teacher very much and feared that the lessons would harm her creativity. But she was afraid to say as much to her parents because the lessons were expensive and had been arranged through a friend of her father's. She made several watercolors of the view from her home in Bolton Gardens in London. This one is from June of 1882 when she was 16. She used watercolor and pencil. The tower in the center of the picture is the Museum of Natural History. We're still seeing her using somewhat muted colors in her work, as was the fashion. Here are two watercolor drawings done at Camfield Place, her Potter grandparents' estate, in 1884 when she was 18. The top is titled View from Camfield Place Drawing Room and is undated. The lower one is View from Terrace, Camfield Place, and dated 1884. They both show very good use of watercolor, especially in the sky, and in the especially in the sky in the lower one. She knows how to handle perspective and show depth with the expanse of lawn, the trees in the midground, and let me see if I can move this. Oh, I can't move this down. I'm sorry. And the fairly flat but distant landscape. On July, about landscapes, on July 16th, 1884, she writes in her diary, "The way our landscape painters fail most is in failing to grasp their subjects widely enough. Most landscapes are in bits, stuck together with with more or less skill, a cloud, a field, a tree, which may be good separately, but are not fitted together in the least. There is such complete unity in nature, nothing out of place or without a use." Later that year in October, she wrote, It is all the same, drawing, painting, modeling, the irresistible desire to copy any beautiful object which strikes the eye. Why cannot one be content to look at it? I cannot rest, I must draw, however poor the result. And when I have a bad time come over me, it is a stronger desire than ever and settles on the queerest things, worse than queer sometimes. Last time, in the middle of September, I caught myself in the backyard making a careful and admiring copy of the swill bucket, and the laugh it gave me brought me around. This watercolor, wash, and pencil painting of Bolton Gardens at dusk is undated except for a November day. It's very atmospheric and excellent in capturing the last bits of sunlight amongst the clouds, along with the lights in the houses across the street. And this is this is a portrait that her father made of her in 1885. She had been ill. I think she had rheumatic fever, and her hair was short because of that. It was growing back in. She's holding her dormouse, Zarifa. She is inscribed on the verso of the photo, age 19, much out of health, haircut short, 1885, dormouse, Zarifa. It's a rather unusual formal portrait for a proper young lady in 1885, but perhaps it was meant to cheer her up, as Zarifa was her much beloved pet. Here is a watercolor wash painting called Lingholm in the Rain from 1898. We can see she's learned to master the use of wash to depict the cloudy, rainy sky. While she uses wash to great advantage in the sky and the trees, there's a lot of detail in depicting the stone and of the wall and the slate of the roof. Oh, I couldn't leave out this other watercolor painting from Lingholm in 1899. It's called Peter Rabbit by the Fire, and it's just a beautiful scene of daily life. The rabbit sleeping by the fire. All right, so now we're going to see a number of landscapes and gardens, because I believe that her skill at painting the natural world helped her create a strong sense of place in her work. This one, called View of Kakubri Bay, is dated September 27th, 1899. It's just a sketch, really. It shows a minimal use of watercolor wash in the sky and great economy of lines. So it yet so well depicts the scene. In this view of a side entrance to Melford Hall, which is the home of a cousin, the flowers in the foreground are only minimally drawn so that your eye is drawn to the doorway, which is where she wants us to focus our attention. It is pen and ink and watercolor, and also undated. And here's a lovely watercolor of a walled garden with mountains in the background from 1900. She's 34 now and an incredibly accomplished artist. At this point. Perhaps I don't need to point out the aspects that make this composition work so well, but I will anyway. The garden walk in the center leads your eye into the midground and then on to the distance. The flowers and branches placed in the midground on the right and the left attract your eye, so you stop and take in their details. To the artist, and I think particularly of Beatrix Potter, who had such innate talent, this often comes naturally, the scene of the beautiful scene, the framing of the composition. Okay, let me see if I can get this out of the way. Yeah, that's better. Let's see. This pen and ink and watercolor painting was done in Faux Park on July 28th, 1903, and is a background study for page 32 of The Tale of Benjamin Bunny. She titled this painting, "The Lettuces Were Very Fine." In these pen and ink and watercolor paintings, which is the style of drawing she used most, in most of her color illustrations for her books. She paints the watercolor first and then adds details with her pen. It's a far more complicated process than drawing outlines in pen and filling in the colors, and requires much planning. And so here's the finished painting for the illustration in the book. So, but you can see it's the same little lettuces. And with a little low wall along this side. And then here's another background study, also at Faux Park, of the garden there, also for the Tale of Benjamin Bunny. And she titled this one, A Little Walk on Planks Under the Sunny Red Brick Wall. On its own, it's a delightful painting. And here it is as the illustration that was published in the book, where it's a little bit less lush, but focuses on the mice talking in the foreground, and Peter and Benjamin I think this little handkerchief is full of onions that they're stealing. To show you a little more of how she worked with preliminary drawings, here are 3 watercolors from the summer and fall of 1903 of a basket next to the potting shed in Faux Park. Each is at a slightly different angle, and the technique ranges from watercolor sketch to pen and ink and watercolor to a much more finished watercolor. So you can see summer, September 11th, September 16th. And then here is what was actually used in the, here's the scene as used on page 44 of the book. And the catalog description for the one on the left, on the right, whoops. This set notes a basket and flower pots in the corner of the garden. And the basket is the one on which the cat sat for 5 hours in the Tale of Benjamin Bunny. Oh, so I think there's a note written on the back. That means there's a note written on the back of that one in her hand that says they're in the corner of the garden, and the basket's the one the cats sat on for 5 hours. Now, the National Trust owns a sketchbook that contains background drawings for the Tale of Squirrel Nutkin. This watercolor is also in it, and a note on it says, countryside roadway bordered with wooden fence and trees, possibly leading to a farmyard. It's undated, but all the other sketches in the book are from 1901. She must have been out for a walk and stopped to sketch this scene. And then in the sketchbook, we also find a drawing of this tree stump with toadstools growing around it and in front of it. And she uses it in the scene on page 28 of Squirrel Nutkin, where Nutkin is playing with oak apples on the tree stump. And there's two variants here. But the one she, whoops, and I guess the one on the left is the final illustration. And one of the characteristics of her illustrations is that the important things are usually in the foreground or the midground, and the background is usually drawn more lightly so as not to distract for from the action. Now, Rupert Potter took a picture, this photograph of her drawing in a field with a bunch of geese and some chickens there. And there isn't enough detail to tell whether she's sketching with pencil or watercolor, but it's clear that she's really focused on her work. And this is from a photo album in the Coats and collection at Princeton. No. And this is the last of the background and finished drawing pairing I'll show you. This is the garden at Buckleyeat in near Surrey, which was the little village she lived in. And it was used for the scene for where Duchess is reading the invitation for tea. Oops, wrong way. There, this is the finished rendering of the garden. So, so it shows Duchess, who's a dog, reading this invitation to tea in her garden. And you note that the most detailed element in the illustration is really the Duchess, the dog. And some people think that that woman in the background who's going down the street might be a self-portrait, although she claims she couldn't draw people very well. But we get a sense of the lush garden without all the details because it's not really part of the story. The important thing at this point is the note. Now, the final 5 things I'm going to show you from where she was living in near Surrey. In the first one from 1909, the first set, you'll see 3 drawings from a 5-day period in November. So the first one is Coniston Water is this lake and these mountains, and it's from November 16th. And then on November 19th, she did this little crossroads, and that became the frontispiece for the Tale of Pigling Bland, where you have little piggies walking down the street. And then this beautiful watercolor and wash view across Esthwaite Water from November 21st. And then the last 2 slides are from 1913 and are beautiful winter landscapes. This one's called Sketch of Mountains and Fields in Snow from January 11th. And I love this watercolor wash and pencil because it really conveys the sense of a cold, quiet, snowy day, which throws me back to my childhood when I was in the country and walking in the snow and experiencing that quiet. A view across Esthwaite Water, winter is also a watercolor wash. Again, her use of watercolor wash with a few lines of color conveys both the view and the atmosphere of this moment. They're so quiet, yet as beautiful as the lively gardens. Now, next I want to talk about 3 contemporary children's book author illustrators who've been influenced by Potter's work. The first and most well-known and outspoken in his appreciation of her is the American Maurice Sendak. He has written and spoken several times about his appreciation of her talent. And I'd like to draw a few quotes from his article The Aliveness of Peter Rabbit, published in the Wilson Library Journal in December of 1965. He wrote, "The art of imaginatively writing and illustrating picture books is at its best a subtle art, exemplified with rare excellence and understatement in Beatrix Potter's work. Peter Rabbit is obviously no more a fact book about the habits of rabbits than it is a purely fantastical tale. It demonstrates that fantasy cannot be completely divorced from reality, that fantasy heightens, sometimes simplifies, and contributes new insights into that reality. Fantasy, rooted in the living fact, here the fact of family, of fun, of danger and fear, is the evanescence of life, and finally of safety, of mother and love. It is a standard that should be applied to every book for the young, and no book can claim the distinction of art without it. It reminds us that genuine art, that is, art animated with a sense of life, adds to our own sense of life and actively helps us to a better understanding of this world and others, the others being perhaps our own inner worlds. Like I said, those snowy scenes we just saw transport me back to my own childhood in the country. Maurice Sendak paid homage to Beatrix Potter with his illustration for Robert Graves' The Big Green Book, published in 1962. While you may have seen her drawings and his illustrations shown together in books and exhibitions, I want to tell you a little bit of the story because I think that makes the illustrations more surprising. And I'm also thinking that Sendak saw Leslie Linder's book, The Art of Beatrix Potter, which came out in 1955. And all of these Potter drawings were published in it. And they're set in various locations. So the story is about a little boy, Jack, who here's Jack reading, who lives with his aunt and uncle and their big dog who chases rabbits. Sendak uses this bed from Campfield Place as Jack's bed. It's used on the title page and later again when Jack's aunt and uncle are searching for him. Jack finds a big green book over here and goes off to read it alone. The place he's reading, this little gardening shed, is based on the rabbit's potting shed drawn at Bedwell Village Lodge in 1891. He discovers the book is full of magical spells. And he's mad at his aunt and uncle because they made him walk with them and he's not allowed to run or play, but just walk calmly. So he uses a spell to change himself into an old man and sits under a tree reading his book. This, on the left here, this crayon drawing of Bush Hall from 1884 was used as the source for this house that Sendak has the aunt and uncle looking out of when they're trying to find him to go for a walk. Instead of Jack, they see an old man. Here he is under the tree. They see an old man reading under a nearby tree. So they go up to the old man and ask him whether he's seen Jack. He says no. Jack, as the old man, asks the uncle if he wants to play cards, knowing that his uncle has a gambling problem. Jack creates a spell so that he, Jack, will always win. Uncle says yes, and they begin. Uncle keeps losing and doubling the bet until he bets his house and property all or nothing. Of course, he loses, and they head off to show the old man his winnings. After they go through a very familiar-looking gate. That looks just like the gate at Hilltop, her house. They approach the house and we suddenly see that it's Hilltop. This is Uncle's house, and here's Beatrix Potter in front of Hilltop. So then Jack tells his aunt and uncle to wait outside while he checks out his new house. Once inside, he changes back into himself. And after a while, he comes out of the house and surprises his aunt and uncle. They ask where the old man was and tell him what happened. He said that he saw no old man, so the house must still be theirs. All is well. Jack decides he better not use the spells in the future. And he doesn't, except for in school, where he does very well. The next person is Rosemary Wells, an American children's book author and illustrator who's written over 120 books and is probably best known for the Max and Ruby series, which follows the everyday adventures of sibling bunnies, curious 3-year-old Max and bossy 7-year-old Ruby. Max's new suit was published in 1979. It's a wonderfully silly book and reminds me of the tale of Tom Kitten in that it shows discomfort at being forced to wear fancy party clothes. Just look at Max's side glance at this new suit of clothes. And then, he puts on the clothes and they're all upside down, and but he went to the party that way anyway. It's a very sweet, silly book. In 1991, Rosemary decided she needed to learn how to paint with watercolors because that would make her, in quotes, a real artist. She had already written 3 little manuscripts called Voyage to the Bunny Planet. In her article for Judy Taylor's 1993 book, So I Shall Tell You a Story, Encounters with Beatrix Potter, she said, if I did not do these stories justice, I knew I would never again be given anything as good by the invisible hand in the sky that distributes ideals. So she went over to London and looked at the Potter collections at the Victoria and Albert Museum and in the Warren Archive. And she also came to the Free Library where I showed her our collection, which is how I got an autographed copy of Max's new suit. Now, she looked more closely than most of us would or could. She saw the techniques used, noticed how Beatrix dealt with mistakes, and she recognized the paint colors used. Rosemary painted Voyage to the Bunny Planet, which is these slides, in watercolor. And the 3 stories, Moss Pillows, First Tomato, and Island Light, were published in 1993. In each story, a young bunny is having a bad day, and Janet, the bunny queen, who you see on the right, whisks them off to the bunny planet where all is made better. Now, the third author illustrator is a Philadelphian named Monica Carnesi. In her day job, she's a librarian at the Free Library who works as a children's materials selector. Monica grew up in Brazil and didn't see any of the Potter books as a child. She grew up with comic books. She went to 1 year of art school, majoring in comics, but decided it wasn't a good fit. She moved to America and was living in Cleveland in 1991 when the big Beatrix Potter exhibition was held at the Museum of Natural History. And in 1992, that exhibition came to Philadelphia and was at the Academy of Natural Sciences. She saw that exhibition and was totally inspired by Beatrix Potter's work. She started looking at picture books. She read all of Potter's little books. She was very attracted to Potter's use of watercolor and her loose and expressive style. Monica's first book, which you see on the right, the award-winning Little Dog Lost, was published in 2012. It's the true story of a little dog trapped on a large piece of ice in the middle of a river in Poland. People see him during his journey down the river and try unsuccessfully to rescue him. A ship finally rescues him when he reaches the Baltic Sea. The crew names him Baltic, and he lives with them on their ship. Her second book, called Sleepover with Beatrice and Bear, was published in 2014 to another round of good reviews. She honors Beatrix Potter by calling her main character, a rabbit, Beatrice. And this is a story about friendship and about how a young rabbit deals with being separated from her new best friend while he hibernates over the winter. On her blog in late 2008, Monica posted an homage to Beatrix Potter. She wrote, "As I became familiar with her life and work, I was always fascinated by her illustrated letters, her beautiful line drawings, and the start of her career as a storyteller. So I did my own interpretation of her now very famous letter to Noel about a little rabbit named Peter." And so this is her just copying that first page of that. So, and I want to leave you with two quotes. One concerns Beatrix Potter herself, and the other concerns one's life as an artist. The first is from the American Betty Harris Stevens, who was Marion Perry's niece, and Marion Perry was an American friend of Beatrix Potter, who said about meeting Beatrix Potter in 1929, "You looked at the eyes under this brim of a hat, and they were the most merry, blue, twinkling, sparkling eyes I ever saw." The second is something I read in the New York Times in 2016, in the spring. Jesse Norman, the award-winning opera singer, was that year's commencement speaker at Oberlin College. Only a part of her speech was published, but I think this part speaks to us and to our search to discover what has made Beatrix Potter's work continue to be so popular. She said, "Strive to live artfully. You see, art brings us together as a family because it is an individual expression of universal human experience. It comes from that part of us that is without fear, prejudice, malice, or any of the other things that we create in order to separate ourselves one from the other. Art makes each one of us whole." And that's the end of my talk. You could unmute yourselves if anybody has any questions.
How large are the paintings?
Like
the landscapes?
The landscapes, well, the sort of they're fairly small. The sort of long ones, like the ones up at her grandparents' house, are maybe 4 or 5 inches tall and, I don't know, 10 inches long. I mean, there's a kind of a landscape kind of sketchbook. They're that big. I would say like the ones that we have are no larger than 8 by 10, I would say.
Thank you.
Oh, Joe McConkey, hi.
Why?
Yeah. Oh, Mio has a question.
Hi. When we were in the Lake District 4 years ago, there was a little show. It wasn't at Hawkshead, but another nearby town, of her mushroom pictures. I was hoping you'd show us a few of those. She did them, it seems, as I remember, in the 1890s when she was in her 20s. Hadn't yet found herself, but the detail and the real, they were like photographs, except better than photographs of just mushrooms. And I guess She was actually the illustrator for the British Mycological Society or something for a while. And I
Well-
had no idea at that point that she'd be going into illustrating children's books. You make it look inevitable the way she does landscapes and rabbits and moves on into Peter Rabbit. But this little diversion into mushrooms I found a fascinating. And I wondered if you know of any other children's illustrators that came into children's literature through scientific illustrating.
I'm not really aware of that. What I know about her is one of the things she was doing was when at the place, probably Dalgoz, that house that I showed you from early on is up in Scotland, and the mailman there was a guy named Charlie McIntosh, and he was very much a scientist as well. And so she was drawing these mushrooms and keeping a copy for herself, and sending him a copy. And she actually discovered that a certain mushroom that it reproduced by spores, and wrote up this paper, but was not allowed to give it because she was a woman. And they wouldn't even let somebody else read it for her there. So that doesn't exactly answer your question, but it answers what I know. Rebecca.
First of all, just thank you. That was fascinating. It's absolutely wonderful. I heard many years ago, and maybe this is not true, that some kind of quote or something, that she really couldn't stand children. She loved animals, and I felt like it's so interesting because her books have such appeal for so many generations of young children, but apparently she didn't really want to have much to do with them, is what I.
No, it's not true. It's
Okay.
not true. She didn't like badly behaved children, as most of us don't. But she, when she was growing up, when she was, I guess, about 16 or 17, it was the last time when she had a governess, or maybe 18. And the governess, Annie Moore, was only a couple years older than she was. So they became very close friends and remained friends. And so these, Moore is her married name, but she used to go visit them and take Zarifa the mouse and some other little mice in a basket and sit down on the floor and play with the mice with the children. So she loved children. And she used to also let like Girl Guides camp on her, on her farm in the summertime and stuff like that. So yeah, that it's a false rumor. Allison.
A collection of these little guys from my youth.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep, my mom made us all collect something. My sister got Madame Alexander dolls. I got Beatrix Potter figurines. Where did this come into the picture? This was my first one, Mr. Jeremy Fisher.
Yeah. Well, she really marketed some of her stuff. Like she developed, excuse me a minute. She developed a Peter Rabbit board game. She had made stuffed animals of Peter Rabbit and Jemima Puddle Duck, and I think that those things were started after her death. Because I think the earliest ones, which were it's on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember the name of them. The Royal Dalton figurines, I think, started in the 50s. I don't think they were earlier than that, but it was something that Warren approved because she did commercialize the figurines, and she had left them the rights.
Yeah, Karen, there was a question as to how the Free Library was able to start this collection in the first place.
So what happened was I mean, I give a whole talk all about that. You know. But the story was the Elkin, William McIntyre Elkins, who ended up giving us his library in like 1949, and that's why the rare book department's up on the 3rd floor. But he and his wife used to read The Tale of Gloucester to each other on Christmas Eve, because it's a Christmas Eve story. And so he was in 1947, the original manuscript and with 12 original watercolors inserted in it. And the manuscript was written in that day's version of like a composition book. Anyway, it came up for auction. He hired Mabel Zahn who was a rare book dealer in Philadelphia, to go and buy it. And the underbidder was the city of Gloucester. You know,
wow.
if it were today, they never would have gotten an exit visa for it. But so he got that, had a box made for it, presented it to his wife, and then she died the next day. So, so when he died the next day, so she was killed in a car accident a couple years later, and they already knew that the library was getting his collections and the room itself, and she decided that the Tale of Gloucester manuscript should go with it. And we had a couple other things from various collectors. And so then the head of the department at the time found out that a guy up in Connecticut, H. Bacon Collmore, had this big collection of Beatrix Potter's work. And she asked him if she could borrow it because she wanted to do a big exhibition for the centenary of Potter's birth, which was 1966. So he lent a whole bunch of stuff, and they mounted this huge exhibition in the lobby and in the first floor, all the first floor cases, and up in the rare book department. And he was so pleased by the exhibition that he and his alma mater, I guess, didn't want his collection, that he gave us his collection. So it was like 100, it was over 100, maybe 105 watercolors. And then those 12, well, watercolors, drawing, sketches, those 12, you know, that manuscript. And then we also got from the David McKay family a manuscript and a whole bunch, like 30 drawings, black and white pen and ink drawings for the Tale of Little Pig Robinson. So, and then somebody else gave us letters, you know, it was just sort of good connections.
Piece by piece. All right. Any other questions before we sign off?
Is there anything in the, oh,
No.
Hollister.
Hi there, Karen. I don't know how to make a raise hand, so thank you for seeing me. Did you get a chance to go to Beatrix Potter's house when you went to London, when you went to England?
The London house was bombed
Not
during
London,
the Second
I mean
World
in
War.
sorry.
Oh, in Hilltop. Yes, I've been there several times, and it's just gorgeous. Up there.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. And
I think somebody else asked the question. Oh no, my sister asked if I was channeling Dad.
oh,
And yes.
and by the way, the date of the dinner and movie at the Ambler is August 10th. I was a date challenge there. But anyway, thank you so much. It sounds as if we could have some kind of follow-up in the future. So, you know, we may just get back to you. And thanks everybody for being part of the program tonight. We do appreciate seeing you all.